Hey guys, welcome to Trail and Air Alaska. We got a guest today. This is Mike out of Oregon. He's a buddy of mine who does a lot of long range shooting and some other stuff. And one of the folks who has really kind of introduced me to this concept and kind of really pushed me to get started in doing this content and starting the podcast about what it's really like hunting up here in Alaska, and just for the average guy to come out and do some of the stuff that I do and some of the stuff that he does. So, Mike, introduce yourself and say hi to everybody.
My name's Mike. Do a lot of long range shooting, do a lot of hunting, kind of in the industry. Brought Tyrell to SHOT Show this year. So he got SHOT Show 2026. Had a good time. And he asked me to join him on the podcast. So here I am.
Awesome. What do you mostly hunt out there in Oregon?
Deer, elk, and bear, and then coyotes year round, cougars when you get a chance. So
Yeah,
I used to
perfect.
live in the illustrious state of Alaska and I got suckered into moving to Oregon somehow and miss it every day.
You'll end up back here eventually. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Hey, so we wanted to kind of talk about just backcountry hunting and what that kind of looks like, and then kind of what defines that, what is kind of the starter kit that you might need, and then some favorite pieces and things that we've kind of found along the way. So, Mike, what's your definition of a backcountry hunt?
For me, a backcountry hunt is basically anything that you have to park, hike, and camp. Um, I'd say, if you're going to be a mile from your truck, you might as well hike in the morning. So for me, there's like a 3 to 4 mile minimum for me to consider it backcountry for myself. The viewers can, nobody's right, nobody's wrong. But for me, I weigh the pros and cons. Like, am I going to make multiple trips or am I only making one trip? For me, if I'm making multiple trips in, I already know I'm making multiple trips out, so I can negate some of the weight that way. I can carry less in. But if you're all one shot, if you're going in 10 miles, then, for me, anything over, I'd say 3 to 4 is what I'd consider a backcountry hunt. I'm not making multiple trips back to the truck, spike camping, and then probably hiking from camp while hunting further from the truck.
Yeah.
So, you find yourself anywhere from 3 to 4 to 10 to 15 miles in when you put your animal down.
Yeah, I think I am still pretty new to the backcountry world as far as longevity. Did my first real backcountry hunt in 2020, and I think for me over the years, as I've kind of moved to look at it and define it, it is kind of like you're saying. It's not. I don't necessarily think it's a miles distance from the truck or anything, but like you said, I think it's are you going out and staying the night or multiple nights out somewhere where there's no access to amenities. So, like you're saying, staying the night from your truck. I've done hunts where I've slept in my truck that I wouldn't consider a backcountry. I've also done a bear hunt where we were only a mile and a half, 2 miles off the road, but you were right up against the mountains looking for bears in kind of these stretches between the highway and the mountains that were sheep country. And so, yeah, I think that it's that remote distance or that remoteness and the ability to get in and out easily is kind of like exactly like you were saying. There's not really a true, I think, a definition as far as distance or hours away. But yeah, I think anytime you're reliant on what you've brought with you
Mhm.
and that's all you've got access to, that's kind of
One
what
trip.
I do. Yep, one trip.
Yeah.
You got that one trip and done backcountry. Um, so starting out, obviously, like I said, there's in 2020 was my first year. I'd wanted to backcountry hunt, but I'd never really gotten into it. And so the first thing that you got to have to really make the jump from backcountry hunting in some ways to or from like road hunting or small day trips and things like that is something you got to go find. So what was the first thing that you really started going out those long distances or these more bigger trips to go chase?
So I'd say my first one was a Taku Inlet moose hunt, and that was my only one in Alaska because I lived in Southeast, several hundred miles south of you. And we have this amenity called the ocean.
Right.
So, that is your trail, and you get
Right.
to bring the boat and all your gear and everything, and you're still, you know, 40 miles from town, 30 miles from town, but you get to take everything with you on the boat. So you
Right.
can set up your spike camp or just, sleep on the boat, depending on what size of boat you got. Um, but I'd say that moose hunt that I did was probably the first one. And then nothing until Oregon when I got into elk and realized, I was spoiled in Alaska because you can go hunt areas where you won't see another person for weeks.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to find that here. So the only way to actually get into the animals that everyone else isn't into is to just go further in, where the people don't want to go. And that's how we've been so successful.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it was sheep hunting. I had always said, not always, but since I was out of high school, I had said that someday I would do these bigger hunts. When we first moved to Alaska, I got into hunting. But then in 20, like 18, 19 timeframe, I was talking to some friends about how eventually someday I wanted to go get a sheep. And I was actually specifically talking about Oregon sheep. I really want to come down and hopefully someday I get the opportunity to come and get a California bighorn there in Southern Oregon. But that's when a bunch of the guys I knew, and you were one of them, who was like, "Hey, dude, you live in Alaska. You live in the best place to be a sheep hunter in North America, or at least as a United States citizen. Like, unless you live in the Northwest Territory or the Yukon, that's questionably better. But like, why are you not sheep hunting?" And that was kind of started the ball rolling, so to say. So for me, getting into the backcountry with that first thing I needed was something to chase, which happened to be Dall sheep. So that kind of started my trip, and it's kind of taken me pretty far, as far as, obviously we'll kind of keep talking about this, but gear and just all the stuff that's required and the planning ahead to really get into backcountry hunting is, you got to have that foresight. But what are the other things that to really start backcountry hunting, if you or if we're talking to somebody or some guy is watching this for the first time, what do you absolutely have to have as your minimum to get started in backcountry hunting?
You need what it takes to get your gear out there, what it takes to take a game animal down, and what it takes to get it back. And that's going to look different for every single hunter. I mean, you could take some of the most advanced guides out there and lay all their kits out, and nothing will be the same. So I think it's, what you're taking with you, what it takes to get that out there, such as a pack or a sled or whatever you're using, and then what it takes to harvest your animal, obviously your rifle, knife set, however you're going to process your animal, and then survival and medical stuff.
Yeah. I think for me, the big things to really get started, the first big hurdles were realizing that the boots I had were not enough. So you need that higher level boot. You're going to need something that can take a little bit more of a beating, that you're going to have. Like the first time I went on a hike while I was preparing for sheep hunting, I really wasn't. I went out on this hike and came back and just had, even though they were well worn in boots, I had hot spots and rub spots where I had started to blister in a single hike, just because those boots, they were great for a lot of the things I did. For moose hunting, for even, I started out wearing them in Juneau. So when it was wet and cold, they were great, but they had 1,000 grams of insulation. Having that 1,000 grams of insulation, trying to do an actual hike with a 30, 40 pound pack or heavier, my feet just were killing me instantly. So I realized upgrading boots was kind of that first thing I did. Looked at trying to find a good set of boots, a pack. I think that that's probably number two. So a pair of boots and a pack. You did mention a sled. I hadn't even thought about that, but you absolutely, like, I don't see doing a sheep hunt would be hard with a sled, but there's a lot of like elk hunting in some of those areas that you absolutely could use a sled or something else. But for me up here, and I think what the average guy is going to get is a pack, and you need
Mhm.
some sort of a frame pack. I had like just a general backpackers. It would be a day pack. It had like a soft, hard plastic or a mild plastic frame in the back, but nothing that you could attach like 100-pound moose quarter to,
Right.
or like you're saying, having everything for a 10-day hunt, like you mentioned earlier. Like, I didn't have a pack that would really handle that. So that pack was the second thing that I was like, this is the number two thing. I've got to get something better than what I've got, because I had a generic pack. The third one was shelter. For me, that was the other big hurdle. That I had a really heavy, bulky backpack that was complicated to put together, and every time I put it together, it was a struggle. and I didn't know how well it was going to handle the wind conditions and heavy rain or snow in the sheep mountains, or in elk country you can get those they're out there in Oregon, those crazy thunderstorms. Um, so I thought that the third thing that would be like most important was that shelter, and whether you decide to go with a teepee or a standalone shelter or a trekking pole shelter, like I thought those were the three things that were most important to start with. If you're trying to get into backpack hunting or backcountry hunting, you got to get a good pair of boots. That doesn't mean any specific brand, but you got to get a good pair of boots that fits right, that's sturdy enough to handle the heavy weight that you're carrying and will fit your feet well. A pack that's able to do the size or style of hunt you're planning on doing. Like I got a big bag because I was doing an expedition style hunt. So I have a 7,000 plus cubic inch bag. Not everybody needs that, but it had a solid frame and then that detachable bag, and then a shelter, some sort of a shelter. And to your point again, too, you're like in the southeast hunts and stuff. You can have a base camp and a spike camp, so you also have to think about if you're going into a backcountry situation, are you going to be having a main camp where you're going to leave all your stuff and then do you want to climb up and spike out at higher elevations, in which case you're going to need to bring two different shelters, because you
Yep.
don't want to leave you don't want to necessarily have to bring everything from your base camp or leave everything out and exposed and then carry that tent or tarp or whatever up. So yeah, definitely those three were, I thought, the first what you absolutely had to have to get into backcountry hunting.
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of things that people don't, they underestimate it. When you get into it the first time, you're like, I made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
And you know, people that watch content like this, hopefully we made the mistakes for them and
Right.
they start thinking about it. But it comes down to, are you going to bring a box of matches? Are you going to bring a lighter? Or are you going to bring a ferro rod? Like ounces equal pounds, pounds equal pain. It's just how it is. And everybody thinks their pack's heavy going in. They'll be crying and complaining, hiking in. Well, now throw all your meat on your back and come out.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, no, you definitely have to weigh all the options. I thought it was pretty. I'm a little bit of a gear nut. I like to, once I delve into a subject, I just like to really immerse myself. And I don't need to buy the highest end gear. Like I don't need to go buy, you know, uh, a $2,000 rain jacket, but I always look for where that break is as far as I'm willing to spend more as long as there's a pretty significant gain or advantage. And
Yeah.
so when you first got in, when I first got into backcountry stuff, and you start looking at, like you said, the weight equals pounds, pounds equals pain, and you start seeing some of the weight differences in things like sleeping bags. Do you go down and do you want to do a 0 degree bag, whether it's down or synthetic, or do you want a 15-degree bag? Is it a true 15-degree bag, or is it a survival 15-degree bag? And
Right.
so, like, there's so much that goes into that, that you don't know when you first get in. And so for guys who are getting into this, like, if you're not a gear nut and you don't want to spend hours and hours and hours researching all this different stuff, you don't have to. Honestly, the guys back in the day, guys like Jack O'Connor and these historic badasses who were hunting and killing stuff out in the mountains way before us, they didn't do any of this lightweight, heavy duty stuff. Now we should take advantage of everything we can, give
Yeah.
ourselves the edge. But like, if you're not somebody who wants to spend the money to buy a super lightweight, super nice backpack or a super lightweight, super nice sleeping bag, you can still do a sheep hunt or a backcountry elk hunt, whatever you're doing, with a inexpensive, good quality, inexpensive bag. Like you don't
Yeah.
have to necessarily buy that stuff. And I think that was another thing that for me when I first got into it, everybody was like immediately, "Oh, you got to go spend $10,000 to go get your sheep kit." And I spent more than I wanted to, but I that was in the time I had the ability to do that, where it's not necessary. And I think that's
Right.
another thing that really kind of stops people when they start doing it. They think that instead of looking at the kit they already have that they're comfortable with and saying, how can I modify this to save weight or to be better prepared, they think they've got to start from scratch and redo everything. And that's just not the case.
Right. And I see hunters, all the time, down because in our areas, our units are fairly small. So you're going to see other hunters until you start getting back their ways. And I'm always just people watching when it comes to gear. I'm looking at what are they using. But like for me, a lot of people they'll go, I don't know if you want to structure this video, like start somewhere and just work on that. But a lot of people bring, a 0-degree bag out. We're in freaking Oregon, man. Like, I've got a hot bag, and when I campfire, when I'm done with my fire for the night, I put my rocks in my hot bag, and I either put
Oh
it
yeah.
in my tent, or I have a small bag, and I can put 1 or 2 rocks in the bottom of my sleeping bag.
Yeah.
So, as you add insulation, things get heavier or more expensive.
Yep.
So, you can go with a cheaper bag and, use like a space blanket or something over the top of your cocoon yourself in it outside of your sleeping bag to retain heat. But you can use heat that you just used at your fire to cook your dinner or whatever and get a hot rock bag. And
Yeah.
if you have a good enough tent that traps the heat, just have that hot rock bag with 6 or 7 rocks in it in your tent. If it's not that good of a tent, put it in your sleeping bag.
Yeah. No, I hadn't even thought about that. I'll have to look into those, especially for like moose hunting and stuff. Yeah, we always do fires, and that would be super. That's a huge idea. Like that's fantastic. Um,